Good. Welcome to Nuts and Bolts of New Ventures. My name is Joe Hadzima. I'll be your guide over the 6 evenings that we're going to journey through the new venture world. All the classes are going to be recorded on Zoom and made available hopefully the next day at the nutsandbolts.mit.edu page. We're doing this because some of the participants are not in the same time zone. So we have an unusual thing here. This is a 4-credit course at MIT, but it's open more broadly. So for those of you who are taking for credit, after the break, I'll give you the details about logistics for that. Every evening we'll have 2 parts. Tonight in part 1, I'll talk about an overview to new ventures and what we're going to be covering. Then we're going to have about 20 minutes for breakout sessions. For people here live, we put signs up for the special interest areas that people indicated when they signed up, and at the break, you can congregate there. We'll talk a little bit about team building. For people that are on the Zoom session remotely, there are breakout rooms in Zoom. Then the second, was there a question? Or? Nope, okay. For the second part of the evening, Bob Jones is going to come in and talk to you about that important thing called a customer. So why do we call this nuts and bolts? This course is really not about theory, it's about doing. The presenters are not academics who are researching this stuff, but people that have done this many times, and in almost every case, I think, of the people coming in here, they're actively working on a venture. And we use the term new ventures because this is not about necessarily businesses alone. It could be about social, nonprofit type things. It's a new venture, a way in which you're going to build an organization to get some idea into the world. We actually had the U.S. Mint took the course once. I never heard what happened to that, but that shows you the breadth of it. There we go. So the question is, why are you here? It could be anything. It could be you don't have any idea about entrepreneurship. Often this course is the first course that people put their toe in the water to understand, what is this about. Maybe you see something that sucks and you want to do something better. That was Drew Houston, who said when he came back from a trip to New York, he couldn't get his files, and he figured there ought to be a way to get your files all the time. And we said, well, that's cloud.
Aló. Hola, Fátima, ¿cómo le va? Sí, mañana le entrego, ya les tengo impresas. Las cuentas por pagar, las que subió, las que me dijo para reversar. Sí, mañana le entrego ya el papelito ya impreso porque le imprimí y le puse. Sí, ¿se va a ir? Ya, ok.
Ты говоришь, и, может быть, он говорит, что
¿De cuál? Ah,
And how do you build a team? Teams are really important. How do you get people to work for you when you have no resources? How do you negotiate? We're going to have a session in negotiation involving, some real cases. And what are the legal pitfalls? There are a lot of things you can trip over if you're not aware of them. And then eventually, once you've got your act together, how do you go about pitching it? What are the elements of trying to convey what you do? If you have a great idea, but you can't convey it to people, and that includes potential investors, but also to people to join the team. How do you pitch them? What are the elements of that? Now, the starting of this course is actually a lesson in entrepreneurial action. And I'll just recite it to you. So I was teaching here at MIT, and IAP came around, or was coming up, and some students said, could you do a course on how to start a company? And can you do it like the real basics? Because, you tell us stuff in the normal stuff you're teaching about, the nuts and bolts of things. So I said, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Now, and I got busy on other things. Now, this is pre-internet. That shows you how old the course is. Pre-internet, before all of you were born, probably. And back then, they had a printed catalog, the IAP catalog. So in October or November, those came out. So one day in the mail, I got from these students a catalog with a little tag on it, and I opened it up, and there's the course that they wanted me to teach in the catalog. And I go, first of all, I said, that's kind of audacious. I'm sort of pissed. What are they doing? How can they do that to me? And then I realized, well, look, I got people that really want this. Want it enough that they'd go and the effort of getting it in the catalog. I don't even know how they managed to do that. So I said, all right, so as we'll learn, when people really want something you have, that's what's called a customer, right? That's somebody wants what you have. That's a customer. And so I said, okay, well, I had like 2 weeks to plan the course. And I said, geez, I can't put a course together in 2 weeks. So it was 4 nights. And I said, well, let me pick, what's the format? We'll do like 2 sessions an evening. We'll do 8 topics, 2 a night. And I figured out what are the 8 different areas people ought to know about in starting a company. And I got on the phone and I started calling people that I knew. And I said, I've heard you present on this. Would you come and do something at MIT about how to start a company? And for areas where I didn't actually know somebody who did it, I would call and say, Bill, do you know someone who can talk about this? And when I say, do you know it, have you seen the person present? Because I want to have a little entertaining. And so to make it easy for these people, I said, well, the format will be easy. Come in, you have 10 minutes to talk about the 3 or 4 things that I wish somebody had told me about whatever you're talking about before I got started. What are the 3 or 4 things you wish you had known? And then we'll open it up to questions. So that's sort of how, I didn't know half the people. I'd never met half the people that were talking. And then the other thing is we were worried, we did it at night because people had day jobs. And I was worried that, if we only had 10 people in the audience, it'd be kind of hard to get all these people coming in. So I got out the Rolodex. That's that thing you put on paper with names, contacts. And I called up a bunch of people, and we did a little marketing. And when it finally came for the first night, we were in 6120, which holds maybe 120 people. And the place was jammed. We had people sitting in which was great, So we had a little energy going. And we just let it rip. And it worked out fantastically. So it taught me a real lesson. If you got a customer you've identified, if as a leader, an organizer, you set very clear goals of what you're trying to do, you find people, qualified people, good people, you convey the goals to them, and you get the hell out of their way, great things happen. There's a lesson in that. So this course, that's how the course started, and it expanded since then. Now, the 2 things that all of the sessions are going to be oriented around are answering sort of 2 basic questions, which is create value. If you don't create value, you don't have anything, right? And so the question of when you talk about value, it's like, what value am I creating? For what people? How much value? And a whole bunch of things around, is that my idea something people value? And the second is, if you have something that's really valuable, that's great. But if you can't figure out how to capture some of that value so you can do it again, then you don't have a venture, right? And so capturing that value in the context of a for-profit would be, revenue minus expenses, profit, cash flow, all of that. In the nonprofit world, it's trying to figure out how do you capture enough resources to sustain it so you can do it again. And that's a little trickier in the nonprofit world because you're dealing with grants and other things. But the same goal is create value and capture some of it. And if you can do that, you're on your way to a successful venture. So for tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about who you are. We're going to introduce the team. We'll introduce a case study that we're going to sort of track. And then I'm going to talk about venture planning basics with an overview. We'll do the break for team building. And then Bob Jones will come in and talk about finding your customer. So, who are you? We have 225 people on the email list. Obviously, there are not 225 people in the room. So we have a whole range of it. You're a very diverse group. We have the colleges. Let's see, where did I put that? We've got Babson College, Boston University, several flavors of Harvard undergraduate, graduate school of education, Kennedy School. We have some Loeb Fellows, the medical school, the Graduate School of Education. We've got National University of Singapore, several people from Northeastern, Rensselaer, University of Sydney, and of course MIT. We also have organizations represented by the people that signed up. Amgen, the Broad Institute, Draper, Midland South, PNC Bank, Weizmann Institute, several private companies. And around MIT, we've got alums, actually some staff and faculty, postdocs, grad students, MIT student spouse or two. And one I found interesting was the parent of an MIT student. Probably wanting to see what it's all about. You signed up for special interest areas. This is the distribution of the interests you have. It adds up to more than 225 because people have more than one. You can get a sense of it. During the break, we have breakout rooms with those topics on it. And here in the room, we've got some places for you to congregate to talk to other people about that. Because a key part of what this course has been about is team building. A number of teams that have gone on to the 100K competition at MIT and actually started businesses have come out of meeting here for the first time. It was the first time we brought together Sloan and other side of campus. And I didn't have a way to survey it the first year we gave it for credit. And I came in and there was a big room and I thought, wow, these must be all Sloan people. So I said, okay, how many Sloans? And a bunch of hands went up and I'm looking, and how many engineering school? Bunch of hands up. And they were sitting, of course, on opposite sides of the room. As you can imagine, you sit with your friends. And so the first thing we did is we did an algorithm. If you're in an odd number seat on the left side, go sit on an even seat and mix it up. But it was the first time we had a large group of people, both sides of campus, coming together. In terms of experience, we have somebody who has founded 3 energy startups. This is the first course ever taken, according to one person. A number of people have taken other MIT entrepreneurship courses. Somebody took nuts and bolts 10 years ago and came back for a refresher, I guess. Some people in government. Some people, 15 years of experience in large companies. So it's a very diverse audience. And so the question is, how do we address all of that? So MIT, we needed an equation, all right? So help me with this one. I'll give you a hint. H is happiness. What are R and E? Anybody? R?
Reality.
Reality, okay. You weren't supposed to say that yet. Are there Sloan people here? Yeah, Sloan usually says revenue divided by expense. You'd be happy if you had a lot of revenue and a little expense, right? But that's a subset of this is a universal law. So the answer is reality divided by expectations, right? So the way to make all of you people happy, of course, because there's such a range of experience and interest, is we reduce your expectation to 0. And are you happy? Okay, so what I want you to do is, during the course, realize that we're trying to address a whole bunch of different people. I don't want you to lower your expectations. You should always have high expectations, but, bear with us on it. You may have heard some of this stuff before. Some of it will be new. I learn something every year. And there you go. Reality divided by expectations, however, is very good on all parts of your business. If you deliver more than you promised to investors, if reality is better than expectations, happy. On Wall Street, where you have 2 people making $10 million a year and one person makes $10 million in 100, one is not happy because of the way that world works. But just think about it. Always, if you can, over-deliver from what you can promise. So, who are we? We are all highly unpaid volunteer speakers. I do increase everyone's compensation every year by 3 times, and they're still doing it, so there must be something. And we have our teaching assistant, King, here in the front row, who'll be here for the first week. A little bit about me. I'm technically still a lawyer. I have a membership at the bar, but there are many different bars. But I've been involved around MIT for a long time. Founding judge of the 100K competition, was the global chair of MIT Enterprise Forum for a number of years. And anyway, that's a little bit. And Ping, here in the front, wave your hand, very important person, will be TA for the first week. We're still figuring out the second week. So that's a little bit about us. Now, our case study. Each of the sessions will have some reference to this particular business and the business plan. It's an older plan. It has an interesting history. The entrepreneur, Yano Cherry, will be in on the last night to tell you a good story about it. But let's introduce what the product is. It was Virtual Ink. It was a way of capturing what was going on a whiteboard or a chalkboard back in the day. And I'm going to try to pull this up now, right? So I escape.
Unlike conventional interactive whiteboards, the small and portable MimioTeach interactive system transforms any ordinary whiteboard into a state-of-the-art teaching tool, quickly and easily. The system includes the wireless MimioTeach bar and rechargeable stylus. It's so easy to set up, it'll be ready in just a few minutes. Simply place the MimioTeach bar onto your classroom whiteboard. Plug in the Mimio Hub wireless receiver and launch the Mimio Studio software. Push the calibration button on the bar and the software will lead you through the process. That's it, the system is ready. Now you can start teaching with interactive lessons, websites, audio, video, and so much more. The MimioTeach interactive system, bringing interactive teaching to your students? Simple.
Virtual Ink is the plan that was actually entered in the 50K back in the day. Let's see, where am I? And the reason we include it is you can see it's a fairly easy concept to understand of what it is. It's not overly technical. There were a number of really technical challenges when they implemented it. It was an entrance at the 50K. The entrepreneur, Ronald Cherry, this was his third attempt at a company. So it shows that you have to have some persistence. He's unusually candid. It's so easy to get people to come in and say, oh, I had this idea in the dorm, and then I did this, and we went public, and I have a yacht and an island and everything. You don't learn a lot. I mean, you learn something from that. You learn a lot more from somebody who has had a very bumpy road. And Ronald's story is a very interesting one. He'll be here on the last class session. So in the materials each night, we might have a section that says, please read this section of the plan. It's not an ideal plan by any means, but it'll give you an idea of how they address it, and then at the end, you'll see how it all came together. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about venture planning basics. D-Day, the largest ever invasion involving very complex organization of ships and planes and people from different countries. And Dwight Eisenhower, who led it, later became president. And his famous expression was, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And there have been variations on that thing. A plan doesn't survive its first impact with reality. But the point is, unless you start to think through what you're doing in a venture, if you don't have a plan, you're not going to have a chance really of succeeding. So why do you have to do it? Well, some practical things. If you're going to ask somebody for money, they want to know, well, what is the plan? What are you planning on doing? How are you going to do it? You'll need it to attract strategic partners, to explain what you're doing to customers and suppliers. I'm in a tie today because I was at an all-day board meeting for a public company, and we were talking about, a sector we're going into, and the question is, we've got to actually educate the customer about why this makes sense. You never want to have to do that, but you'd rather have them understand it, and you'll need it to attract key people. So think of it as a roadmap for your venture. And in the old days, we'd put together these big old plans, 30, 40 pages with lots of details. You don't really need to do that, but you need to go through the process of what's in that, and we'll talk about those concepts here. And the famous expression, people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. And again, these questions of, who am I selling to? Who wants what I have? How do I reach them? What will they pay? How do you capture value? And how are you going to deliver the product? And what resources are you going to need? Now, it's really simple no matter what it is. It's what I said before, create value and capture some of that value so you can do it again. In the past renditions of this course, if we had 2 TAs, we would do there's a scene in The Social Network that talks about what their plans are, and it's a very classic thing that illustrates the point, but we only had 1 TA, so I didn't do it this year. Okay, so you want to think about your venture as a pyramid. This is a way that helps you think through what's going on. So at the top is a mission statement or vision statement. We'll come back to that, what that is in a moment. It's a very succinct statement of what it is you're about. Underneath that is the elevator pitch. Elevator pitch because in the old days, it's still valid, but in the old days, all the venture capitalists had offices in high-rise buildings, and the issue was if you stepped into an elevator with somebody and they turned to you and say, well, what's your venture about? You have like 20, 30 seconds to do it. Then the VCs moved out to the suburbs, and the elevators were only maybe 2 stories, 3 stories, but they were slower, So you still had maybe 20 seconds. So the idea, can you put what you're doing in a succinct way? Underneath that would be an executive summary. I'm in one of the companies I've co-founded. We're in a fundraising mode now, and we have an executive summary that gets sent out when somebody shows an interest. And then underneath that, if they come back, we've got the full presentation. Whoops, the pitch deck. Now, it's one sentence to a paragraph for the mission statement. Elevator pitch, maybe 30 seconds. Executive summary, maybe 2 to 4 pages. By the way, these slides will be on the website by tomorrow morning. Pitch deck, the famous 10, 20, 30. 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 point font. That was Guy Kawasaki, I think. And then underneath it, though, is you've got to have a foundation where if you drill down through any of this, you know how to answer these questions across a whole bunch of things. These things you don't have to have up front, but you ought to at least have thought about them and try to figure out which ones are key. Now, one of the problems, if you have a really great pitch and a lot of hype with nothing underneath, you don't want to end up like Elizabeth Holmes. People familiar with that story? Theranos. And she's, I think, sentenced to 10 years in prison because it was the Silicon Valley fake it till you make it thing. Underneath it, there was a lot going on there. So it's good. This is not usually a problem at MIT. There's more substance. It's harder for MIT people to go and do the wow pitch type of thing. But if you are one of those people, make sure you've got the support underneath. Remember, H equals R divided by E. But one of the problems in this world is you got to worry about the reality distortion field. That is, if you think the reality is different than it really is, this is the Elizabeth Holmes, the Steve Jobs had that famous expression. Does this make sense? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Okay. So a mission or a vision statement. Again, you're trying to come down to one sentence. Why would you have one of these things? Because you want to be able to convey quickly to somebody what it is you're doing. Now, I can guarantee you, when you see people doing presentations and they're wandering all over the place, it's because they haven't really figured it out. And it's hard to do, to come down and say, what is it we're about, and convey it clearly. And you want to do that, again, for a whole bunch of constituents that you're trying to do with. So here's an example of what that might look like. We help X do Y by doing Z, where X is your target audience. Y is the problem or goal that they want to solve, and Z says how you do it. So, for example, here's one. We help people without 3D printers, so that's the target customer. I can't read this. Bring their ideas to life by providing 3D printing services, etc. So again, very clear idea of what they are. This is Steve Blank's formulation of X, Y, and Z. There are other ways to do it. You don't have to do it this way, but it's a good way of thinking about it. What do we do for whom, and what do they get as a benefit of it? Okay, so as we're developing the roadmap, who should do it? The founders, the team, and hired writer or consultant. It doesn't really matter, but you need to own it. I had two Indian entrepreneurs in the networking area, really had done an amazing job of stuff, but they were really incapable of sitting down and writing a plan. And we eventually, it was actually when this course is usually taught in 10-250, I knew somebody there. I said, what are you doing, during the break? And he said, well, I'm looking around for stuff. I said, well, I got some guys that you might want to talk to. And we hopped in his truck and went out and visited them. Their office was in a strip mall above a delicatessen. And he worked with them for a while to help develop the roadmap for them. But at the end of the day, they had to own it. So if you feel that you can develop it yourself, you should try, but don't be afraid to reach out. Now, the elements of the things you need to address, these are a bunch of different topics. We're not going to cover all of them. We'll cover some of them. But you need to be thinking about all of these and how it affects the venture that you're thinking of launching. Because we can be sure that investors are going to be thinking about these things. Note that technology is not automatically a topic in this. People rarely buy technology for technology's sake. Sometimes they do, but normally they buy what technology can do. If you have something that creates value for certain customers, that's what they're buying. They're not buying the technology per se. So again, for the MIT crowd, the natural tendency is to go and talk about how great the technology is. And that's really what's exciting about this place. The question is, what value does that technology have for who? And how do we build a business for it? Now, an executive summary, usually a standalone document, ideally 2 pages or less. The one that I just wrote for the venture we're co-founded is a 2-pager. And the goal, it's the first thing investors read. They're not going to want to waste time necessarily talking to you until they've seen something. So you ought to have something. It's like a resume. A resume is something you put out there so you can get a job interview, right? So the executive summary is a resume for your venture. And the idea is to get the interview, which is to give the pitch. Now, over the years, as I've listened to a lot of pitches and I've sat with investors and stuff, I said, well, when people look at a pitch or they hear a pitch or they read something, what are they really thinking about? And I boiled it down to what I call the 3 W's, and we'll come back to this several times. The 3 W's. The first W is, why this? Why is this thing that these people are proposing, why are they doing it? Is it something important? For investors, the venture world, because these are what we're doing here in startups are high risk, so they want to have high return because they know if only 10% are going to succeed, the ones that succeed better succeed big to make up for the ones that don't. So the question is, why this? Why is this something important or a big problem? Why now? Why is now the right time for this? People know about 3D printing. Everyone done 3D printing? How old do you think that technology is? Yeah.
In 1980, it was invented in 1980, and then
Yeah.
I guess it was Stratasys, and the cash converted for 2 years, and then
Yeah, the patents are all expired. So why now? So I was at an investment conference 2 or 3 years ago, and somebody came up to me and he said, "You're at MIT, right?" Yeah. "Tell me about this new 3D printing." And I said, "It's not new. It's been around. What's new is there's a convergence now of materials. We can now do it in metals. Various things have come together, controllers and other things that now we can use, makes something other than plastic toys. And so, it's been around, but why now? Because there might have been some thing that came together. The venture that I'm talked about that I've co-founded, we're doing neurostimulation. That is, if you take a pharmaceutical, it's a chemical, it has all sorts of side effects, right? That's why you have all the ads on TV about, tell your doctor if you have headaches or whatever. Many times those chemicals are affecting nerves to do something. Well, it's well known that you can stimulate nerves directly to get certain results. That's been around for a number of years. The problem is, the cost of doing it, the form factors. But today you can take and print electronics on on film, just like a high-speed printer. And so we've got a form factor that's like a Band-Aid, literally like a Band-Aid, where the electronics are on the gauze part. And the cost all in volume is going to be less than $1. So now we can apply that to deliver electric stimulation to specific nerves for certain things. The first product that we came up with was for overactive bladder. And it's hard to understand. So you take this Band-Aid and you put it behind your ankle bone. And when you feel the urge to go, you press a button on your smartphone or a fob, and it gives a certain electric current, hits the tibial nerve that runs up from the foot up into the pelvis, and effectively blocks the signal going from the bladder to the brain saying, you've got to go to the bathroom. Overactive bladder is missignaling from the bladder to the brain. So we've licensed that off to the largest consumer products company in the world, and hopefully that'll be in the market within the year. But the reason I go there, it's the convergence of being able to do it in low cost, high production at low versus, and have a very effective delivery of a solution that before would have taken, something the size of a deck of cards or something. So why this, why now? And then finally, why this team? Why do I think this team is going to be able to do it? Now, if the team has done it before, you have a certain degree of confidence, right? So, but if for most of us, we've never done it before. So why would we have confidence in you? And I think there's, when we get into talking about business models, the concept of business model and how you put together the plan, the roadmap together, is going to tell the investors, these are people that are serious, they can make it happen. They have a good chance of making it happen. And then, of course, you've got their attention when they ask the fourth why, which is, why won't this work? So if they're starting to question you about it, then it's a standard sales thing. If you've ever been in sales, once the customer starts raising objections, then you've got them on the hook, right? If they're not asking questions, they don't care. So the fourth why. So when you think about, putting together your executive summary, when you think about doing your pitch, think about the three whys. Amy Smith, who was a founder of D-Lab here at MIT at the Edgerton Center, and won the MacArthur Prize one year. I remember in the 100K competition, she stood up and she said something like this. She said, 1.9 billion people on the planet don't have access to clean water. The only way to test for biological contamination today is to incubate a sample for 24 hours to see if anything's growing. The only incubators out there today are powered by electricity. The 1.9 billion people that don't have access to clean water pretty much don't have access to electricity. I've got an incubator that doesn't require electricity. Would you like to hear more? I mean, that to me, why this? That's a big problem. I had no idea it was 1.9 billion people. That's a big number. Why now? Well, she's going to tell me. She's figured out something. And why this team? Well, the fact that you might be out of MIT gives you a leg up on that. But that was a very powerful presentation. I remember it even today, and that was 10 or 15 years ago that she did it. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so executive summary. Obviously, you want to make it interesting, like a resume. If it gets your reader's attention, then she'll want to hear more. The elevator pitch is to the executive summary as the executive summary is to the full plan. So again, the elevator pitch, gee, that sounds interesting. Can you send me an executive summary? Or, they may not call it executive summary, yet you have a summary. And then if they look at that, you get to come in and do the pitch. So it's a key type thing. And think of the pyramid. You want to get in that thing, it tells who you are, what's your strategy or vision, who are you doing this for? What's the potential? How are you going to make money? Or how much money do you need? By the way, never put terms in an executive summary or even in a pitch deck. For a whole bunch of security law things we'll talk about on Thursday night. But when you're dealing with investors, they may ask you, if you watch Shark Tank, I've been watching that more recently because it happens to hit just about the time I'm eating dinner. And in fact, I've taken some of the Shark Tank episodes to teach things about deal structuring. But the first thing they do is coming out saying, hi, I'm Joe. I'm seeking $100,000 for 10% of my company. And in the real world, you don't do that. But because you want to get them excited enough to want to know more. And you'll get to the discussion later when you've had a chance to really explain to them the value of what you're creating. Okay. In the materials, there's the virtual ink plan. This is the executive summary from that. For those taking it for credit, there is a writing requirement, and it can be an executive summary. And I'll tell you again before you submit it, if you do an executive summary, don't follow this example. It's there to show you an example. Every year I get something that looks almost like exactly this. But you can see one of the interesting things here, and when you hear Yonald on the last night, they were seeking an investment of $320,000 and a further investment of $2 million. The real thing that happened was a little bit different than that. So just remember those numbers when he comes in. Okay, so when we talk about market opportunity, you want to say, well, people want to know, well, how big is this? How big is the bread box? You talk about how big is it now? So think about if you were Uber. Today there are so many taxis. We're going to change the world, and we're going to make it bigger. And here's how we're going to do it. So there's an opportunity. Why is this the right time? Convergence for product or service. I talked about 3D printing. When I talked about air traffic control, one year in the 100K competition, we had a team that came in with an elaborate plan about how they were going to make this air traffic control system spectacularly better. And I remember the judges said, well, that's great, but you got to change the whole air traffic control system. And I remember the team said, well, don't you know there's a RFP out for that? And we said, we read everything, we listened, nobody said that. Obviously, if there's an RFP out for an air traffic control system, then we're very interested because, somebody wants it at that point. So it's an example. Sometimes you can forget, you know stuff and you expect other people to know it. And this was like a surprise. Doesn't everyone know there's supposed to be a new air traffic control system? It sounds silly, but I'm guaranteed somebody will make a mistake like that. When you go to market analysis, it's really understanding how people are doing things out there today and where you would fit in. One of the classic problems, and I've got into ventures knowing this, is when you have to get people to change the way that they do something in order to get the real benefits that you can. If you just changed your organization this way, you'd save all this money. Well, that's a hard thing. You want to figure out how you can slot whatever you're doing in to solve a specific problem that they're solving today, that they can slot in if possible. So it's okay to try to change the world, but if you have to change organizations to change it, that's a tough one. The other thing people wonder about it, I've heard investors talk about, if you win, who loses and what is their response? Could somebody come in and just come back and slam you with it? Now the good news, not the good news, the reality out there is what happens to most ventures that get funded? The investors are going to want an exit of some sort. That's where they get their money back. Typical would be a public offering, IPO, but would be one. But more typical, it's called a trade sale. Somebody buys them, acquires them. Today we were talking about a particular company that's grown through acquisitions and the difficulty of integrating those acquisitions, but that's the typical way. And the reason is, think of it, if you're a large company and you've got $1 billion of revenue, and you're going to want to invest the Wall Street that you're going to grow 10% revenue next year, you've got to generate $100 million in new sales above what you did this year in order to have 10% growth. Now that's hard sometimes. And so if you come along with a product or service that fits into what they want to do, they may come and acquire it to actually and put it into their organization and run it. So if you can think about it, venture capital is a form of outsourced R&D. If I'm a big company and I decide I'm going to try to develop something, for most of the time, the money I spend is expensed. It's an expense that hits the profit and loss statement. It reduces earnings. If you're a big company, your earnings go down. Wall Street values you usually on a multiple of earnings. That's not a good thing. By the way, if I'm a big company, it takes me longer to do things. So this large consumer products company that I said we licensed, they should have been in the market a year ago. COVID got in the way, but they're slow. They think they're fast, but we think of them as slow. And they may have the wrong, the world's changing. They may not have the right team. So if you can go out, find something that you can show that people want, get there faster, get some traction going, they're very happy to come and pay a premium for your company. Because when they buy your company, they purchased an asset. This is a quick lesson in accounting. The asset goes on the balance sheet. It doesn't go through the profit and loss statement. And now they can take whatever you did, put it through their sales and marketing, and generate more revenue so they can meet their 10% growth. So you can think of it, they're willing to pay a premium for the outsourced R&D that you did. And that's sort of the basis of venture capital. So anyway, there we go. How are we doing time-wise here? Go-to-market is a big thing. You'll hear people say, how are you going to go to market with your product or service? And what's the plan for that? Where are you today? If it's a technology-related thing, where are you today? Do you have a prototype? Do you have anything? You're surprised how people forget to say where we are. When my co-founder, we were putting together the executive summary, I said, well, you didn't tell them, where we are. We've got, 20 patents, we have 2 issued and 18 in the works. We've got a prototype that we have a platform that we license to the big consumer products. We're going after obstructive sleep apnea with this, we've got machine learning so you haven't told them any of that. You think of it as how are they going to know that? So where are you in the product status? Typically, as you're thinking about evaluating a venture that you might get involved with, the reason we go through all of this, what is the most valuable, expensive resource that you have as an entrepreneur? It's your time, right? So figuring this out for yourself is key. Investors are going to want to know, but you ought to think about it for yourself. Are you willing to commit 5 or 10 years to this? Do you have enough conviction that this works? If you're looking at a project that I call like the nuclear fusion, now recently we've had some nuclear fusion companies that have been funded, but the fundamental issue with nuclear fusion, until you get the whole thing working, you have nothing. Right? So if you're developing a product or service that requires a whole bunch of stuff to come together before you can have anything that gets in the market, that's a tough one. So you should rethink. So for example, I mentioned the overactive bladder. The second product we're going after is obstructive sleep apnea. And so in order to do today, you either have to wear a CPAP. Obstructive sleep apnea is when your tongue falls back, cuts off air to your you basically start to choke, and your heart wakes up and you gasp. And this can happen in severe cases, 20 or 30 times an hour, or a minute, hour. And so if you may have seen ads on TV for something called Inspire, where you don't have the mask that you have to wear, and that's actually an implant, a surgical implant that costs $20,000. They cuff the hypoglossal nerve, and they stimulate that nerve to cause the tongue to move. Well, that patch that I described for overactive bladder, we've shown we can move the tongue from the outside without surgery. Now, to do that, we're going to need FDA approval because we're putting electrical energy into the body. But in order for that to work, we need to detect that there's an apnea event. So our first product, again, trying to get to market and avoid the nuclear fusion product, is a detection patch, something that will detect the onset of an apnea event. Because we'll need that anyway in order to do the treatment. And we think we can get there without, if we position it right, we won't need FDA approval just to collect the data. And we've got machine learning that's analyzed the results of, we have a database of about 1,000 sleep lab. If a doctor thinks you have apnea, they'll send you to a sleep lab, and they wire you up and say, have a good night's sleep. And they record all sorts of things. And then they go through and they annotate when there was an apnea event. And our machine learning algorithms on that we can identify an apnea event as 10 seconds. In the first 2 seconds, we're up to about 92% detection rate on that. So that's an example of where we're focusing. And by the way, it's like a COVID. You take a COVID test not because you think you want COVID. You want to show you don't have it. So detection, we think is a potentially bigger market. So what I'm saying here is, as you think about what you're developing, think about, can you get there quicker, or do you need to have all the pieces together? And this is action planning. As engineers, we're sort of trained to solve the entire problem, and that's a good thing. But when you're thinking about a venture, either for you or for investors, there are usually some credibility testers that say, I don't think you can do that, or I think that's a problem. And a key thing is to identify what are the things that if I can show that I can solve that, or I'm on my way to solve it, that people will have more faith that I can actually do it. So say you're building the Golden Gate Bridge. That's a big project. Maybe you decide that the credibility testers are, can I secure on-ramp and off-ramp property? So maybe you want to go and get an option on that. Or maybe there's a concern about what's the bottom look like. And so maybe just paying a little bit to get some core samples to show what the structure would look like would go a long way to convince people that this is a credible project. From an engineering viewpoint, you'd want to do all of that, but identify the credibility testers. And you want to try to sequence whatever activities you're doing to build value. You don't want to get eliminate or reduce dependency. I saw the first plan for Zipcar, and I thought it was a great idea if it could be done, but think of all the things you had to do. You had to get parking places designated in Cambridge. I mean, the story, if you're recruiting a new faculty member, we can offer you 3 things. Tenure, the Nobel Prize, or parking. And parking wins is the joke. So you had to do that, and then you had to have all the infrastructure. There's a lot of things that had to happen in order for Zipcar to be successful. Uber was a lot simpler the way they went after it. They sort of avoided a few things. You want to try to coordinate your plan of what you're doing so you can have value recognition events to show that you're doing it. You don't want to get caught between events. If you promise X and you don't get there and you run out of money, you have the dreaded down round potential. You'll probably get away with it the first time, but if you continue to do it, the valuation, you're going to have to raise money at lower and lower valuations, which is very painful. We'll show you some of that dilution stuff in one of the classes. But the trick is, how do I avoid getting stuck between those, running out of money between events that I could control? So, if often, look, entrepreneurs are a little bit of control freaks. The reason some people become entrepreneurs is they say they're not employable by others. So you'd want to control as much as you can so it takes it out of the hands that you have no control over, because, you can really get... We got stuck with the FDA on that overactive bladder patch, and it was painful. So there we are, back to the supported vision. If you can think about, as you try to build out your roadmap for the venture, you're going to think about all that stuff at the bottom and all these things we've been talking about, and then over time distill it down into a pitch that conveys the key things to people that you're trying to convince, and then you'll have your executive summary and other things on top to get to the point where you can do the full thing. So, and don't forget my famous thing. This was an interesting quote that I ran into the other day. Kosala invested in a startup of a friend of mine who had done a number of things. And my friend asked him for guidance, and here's what he said. You'll face about a dozen real challenges in developing the technology and venture, which is common for most ventures. 5 of these, you'll be resourceful enough to find solutions from your background, the field, the ecosystem, friends, etc. An additional 5 of these, your team will be smart enough to solve. And my friend said, well, what about those other 2? And he said, with these, you better get damn lucky, or darn lucky, excuse me. So that's sort of the reality out there. I don't mean to turn people off, but it's not as easy as you would think. And I wish you all a lot of luck on this. So we're running a little ahead of where I thought we would be, but I think it's a good time to do the break for team building. So for those taking the course for credit, I'll explain after the break a little bit more. There's a writing requirement. We encourage team efforts. The reason teams are, it's been shown, succeed much better. The idea of the lone entrepreneur doing it all by him or herself is pretty much a myth. You really need a team. Nobody has all the skills. And so what we encourage, if you're doing it for credit, and the writing requirement is that you do it in a team. And it's worked pretty well here. So in the room here, if you're here and you have an interest in one of the areas that are on the signs around the room, you'll gather there and chat with other people and see if you have anything in common. If you're out on Zoom, Ping is going to open up the breakout rooms, introduce yourself, etc. We'll have about maybe a 20-minute break thing. And then we'll come back together. I'll talk about course logistics, and then we'll introduce Bob Jones for the second part of the evening.